Okay, we are going to try to put a bow on the Imperium Romanum because we want to kind of move on, I think, to some other things. But you might recall that last week we talked about the lion's share of the Roman emperors. Again, if you're joining us tonight for the first time, you need to know that this class is a context class, not so much a textual class, though at times we do tie what we're saying to the text of the Bible. We're trying to get a feel for the world of the New Testament. The world of Jesus, the world of Paul. And in order to do that, we've talked some about chronology. We've talked some about the Judaic background. We started with hopefully it wasn't a shocking observation that Jesus was a Jew. Okay, if he was a Jew, we might need to know some things about the Jews and their story and all of that. And so you get a little feel for at least the Jewish people and the Jewish religion. But then you move from that and you get to thinking about that there were world leaders, as there are today. And the game in town back then was the Roman Empire. But underneath those emperors, it wasn't like these emperors were visiting all these cities. I'll remind you, they didn't have planes. They didn't have, some high-speed Amtram there that could get on and go from place to place and kind of mingle with the people. So they would stay in Rome, or maybe they'd go to their vacation spots. Really, after Augustus, a lot of the people would not have met the emperor, more than likely. And so in this lesson, what we want to do is to deal with the powers that be in Judea, getting more local, because those are the names that get a lot of play in your New Testament, stretching from the Gospels through the book of Acts. And then there's some other folks that are mentioned here and there throughout the letters, but there's only so much we can do. I want to start by just giving you a feel for how the Roman Empire sort of divided itself. So when we think about America, we think about 50 states, do we not? When we think about our federal government, we think about our state governments, and then we got our municipalities going down to counties of the states, and then you get into, of course, you got your governor of the state, and then you start getting into the cities, and we got mayors, and we got county executives, and you got all these people, okay? We're not going to get that detailed, but it is good to have a working knowledge of some of these things. And so the Roman Empire was divided into territories called provinces. And most of these had been acquired by conquest, okay, after 240 BC. But in some cases, these territories were bequeathed to the Roman Empire as gifts or something like that. A few others were technically called client kingdoms. These were free kingdoms that adjoined Rome's territory. There would be some special alliances that were formed. And as long as the client kingdom behaved, Rome wouldn't conquer you. Okay? Rome had a unbelievable military, but they would allow some of these territories to kind of keep their own identity and all of that. So it might be interesting to know that at various points in times, Judea was a client kingdom, all right, in relationship to the Roman Empire. Now, among the various provinces, there were various classifications of cities. And I guess the one that's worth highlighting here is there at sort of the top of the scale of the cities, there were colonies of Roman citizens. And if you happen to be in one of those colonies/cities, there would be probably a lot of military veterans walking around that had been, kind of decided to live out their lives there. They were sometimes granted partial or complete immunity from taxation. So that's, you guys, some of you like, I don't like taxes. You might find yourself into a Roman colony, right? Each was like a little Rome, a Rome away from Rome. And it's important for you to know that some of the cities mentioned in your New Testament were in fact Roman colonies. They were these cities at the top of the scale. Here's your list. You ready? Philippi. Philippi was a Roman colony. Corinth, Antioch of Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, and Troas. So these were like little Romes away from Rome, so to speak. Probably the biggest one that gets a lot of discussion along these lines is, in fact, Philippi. And it ought to be interesting to you that as you read through that letter, there is discussion, for instance, where Paul says, our citizenship is where? Is in heaven. But the word he uses for citizenship, a lot of people took pride in being, members of a particular Roman colony, Roman city. And at times, some of these names get used instead of the city. So Achaia, right up here, let me get this. So, like it mentioned, I don't expect you to remember this, but we mentioned on Sunday morning in the sermon that Apollos, he left Ephesus over here, which is in the Asia area, and he went to Achaia, which is where Corinth was. Okay? Macedonia. We talk about the Macedonian call. Okay? That's where you're going to find places like Thessalonica, Philippi, some of those places. So, one of the benefits of the Roman Empire is called the Pax Romana, or that is Latin for Roman peace. Okay, P-E-A-C-E. And it was a time, as the name suggests, of a long period of peace and minimal military expansion. We often talk about Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son. I think it's kind of important to note that from about 27 BC to 180 AD is when the peace of Rome prevailed. Now, why is that significant? Well, it's going to be kind of nice if you're trying to save the world and you're going to be traveling in at least an area of the Roman Empire and you're going to be expanding out there. It's kind of nice to know you're not going to be running into any wars or any expansions on the front. Or there was relative peace that prevailed in the Roman Empire during precisely the New Testament times. Okay? Is that a coincidence? Is it providential? We got some foreknowledge here. These are just things to consider, right? Now, the provinces did benefit from the peacefulness of Rome, but they paid a price. The Romans collected tribute from all of their provinces. And they usually did that through a method called tax farming. Okay? So wealthy men of Rome, the publicani, or we like the word, We know the word publicans in some of your translations, and then a lot of your translations just call them straight up tax collectors, okay? So I want you to imagine this, all right? Want to collect the tax from a given province. Well, some wealthy men would come in and they would buy contracts from the Roman government that would allow them to collect taxes in the area, all right? The amount to be equal to what they paid the government for the contract plus 25% interest. Now, what if you decide as a contractor to subcontract? Well, now I'm going to subcontract. I'm going to allow somebody else to kind of buy in on this Ponzi scheme or whatever, and they're going to get to do a little bit of interest on the side. You can imagine as this thing trickles down into the cities and all of this stuff that you're just paying way more than what you should be paying in taxes, because there's all these people that got to get what? That want to make a profit, right? How many of you would say, you know what? I want to buy a contract to be allowed to gather the taxes and the people, and all I hope to do is break even. How many of you are going to do it for that? You're not going to do that. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of headache. There's a lot of people who don't like you, right? It's like, I got to get mine, right? So they had this sort of scheme that they would work out here, and it explains why people like Matthew and Zacchaeus were despised by their compatriots. Not only were they working for the conquerors, but they, at times these tax collectors might extort some money from people. I don't know whether Matthew was that way. We know they had to make a little bit of something, Now, few of the territories gave the Romans as much trouble or as little benefit as Judea or Palestine. One scholar calls Judea the classic instance of an intractable area. Many Jews, as we've talked about, were excused from paying taxes because of favors that had been done for Julius Caesar and other things along the way. Jews across the empire had, at least in some outside of Palestine, their taxes reduced based on how much they were sending to Palestine for their temple tax and all of this. They had all of these benefits. Rome catered to them, but they just seemed like they were always seething and on the verge of revolt. And so at times they were a client kingdom, at other times they got their hands slapped, and then other times they went back to being a kingdom, and then it was a mess, all right? And we've already seen that it wasn't all that good in the Hasmonean period and prior to that either. Now, what we want to look at here is three local powers during Christ's life, okay? First one we'll mention is the high priest and the Sanhedrin. And if you are, if you're here and you're familiar with the trials of Jesus, and then you're familiar with some of the instances in the book of Acts, that's where this starts to come to a head. I will tell you that, a lot of people have simplified this discussion about the Sanhedrin, but when you get into some of the rabbinic literature, there's talk about a greater Sanhedrin and a lesser Sanhedrin. There's talk about a 23-member council of some kind, and there's talk of a 71-member council of some kind. And the big question is what I'm reading in the rabbinic literature, Mishnah stuff, okay, that is post-1st century AD, how much of that is true in the 1st century AD? Another thing where this comes up too is, I know when I was 20 years ago, remember doing a lesson on the trials of Jesus. And I thought, I'm going to get nerdy on this, and I'm going to dig into the Mishnah. And this is before I really had any decent understanding and training as to what I was getting myself into here. So I remember itemizing out of the Mishnah all of the sort of the protocol that they were supposed to follow, the Sanhedrin was supposed to follow when it came to trials and interrogations of people. And I had this list of things that they were supposed to do. And when I compared it to the Gospels, I was like, they didn't do that, they didn't do that, they ignored that, they broke that, they didn't do that, they did, And I thought, boy, I'm really showing people. So I'm showing just how corrupt this Sanhedrin was. But here's the big question again. How much of what I was getting from the Mishnah was true of the Sanhedrin in Jesus' day? You see what I'm saying? That's not something I really took into account. And so those people, I don't know, hopefully they forgot that lesson. You know what I'm saying? Like it just disappeared out of their brains. So I guess I'm a little wiser about that now. But just generally speaking, it was the supreme Jewish religious sort of political / legal council in Jerusalem in New Testament times. It was composed of chief priests. It was composed of elders, which would have been some of the lay aristocracy, we might say, in Jerusalem. It was composed of scribes who were like experts in the law, writing it, talking about it, discussing it. You would have had a mixture of Sadducees and Pharisees, and then the president, we might say, of the Sanhedrin was the high priest, okay? And in Jesus' day, that high priest would have been Caiaphas, okay? Although, as we've mentioned, his father-in-law, Annas, still retains some power. One of the things, though, that often gets pointed out is that by John 18, verse 31, it appears as if the Sanhedrin was not, in fact, allowed or had the authority to carry out the death penalty. Because in John 18:31, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." He's not. I don't see any issue with him and Roman law. He's obviously done something to ruffle y'all's feathers based on your weird law. Y'all take him and deal with him. What did they respond? They said, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." So this is why they're appealing to Pilate. This is why they need Pilate to do it, because they didn't have that authority. Now, some of you smart Bible students, some of you might be thinking, well, what about Stephen? They just lynched him, And there's other stories that come up where it seems like they took that power into their own hands and did something, right? Why not in the case of Jesus? There's your dissertation or master's thesis one day or something, maybe, okay? No records really remain of the proceedings of the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. Again, there is protocol and there's all this information in rabbinic literature, but we just don't know how much of that applied to the first century reality. The next local power was the Judean king. And this is going to take a little bit of discussion here to kind of wrap our minds around this. But you'll notice the name that you need to associate with the Judean king is Herod, okay? So here's your beautiful graph, right? And if it looks busy, it's because the Herods were busy, okay? Doing a bunch of underhanded, weird stuff. At the time of Jesus' birth, Judea was a client kingdom. Okay? Ruled by Herod the Great, who is at the very top of this thing right here. Okay? You may recall from a prior lesson that at one point Herod the Great was pro-Antony. Then Antony got killed. And he's like, oh no, I need to be friends with his opponent. And so he left the fence to become a friend of Octavian. And or Augustus is the other name. So he kind of moves sides, and he's able to retain his kingdom. People surmise that maybe there wasn't another suitable person to take his place, or maybe Octavian knew, hey, if I don't kill him, he'll be indebted to me, and he'll always stay under my thumb. Herod was a Romophile. He was a lover of Rome. He wanted to be thought of well by Rome. but he also kind of wanted to be thought of well by the Jews over whom he ruled. Okay? The problem, though, with Herod is that he was, in fact, an Idumean. He was from Idumea, think Edom, and who do you associate with Edom? You ready? Esau. He is from the descendants of Esau. The Herod line is. That's kind of interesting. So Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated, right? Jacob I've chosen, Esau I'm not choosing, for service here. And so there was, Jews might think of the Edomites as half-breeds. Kind of a similar relationship, maybe not as antagonistic as they had with the Samaritans, but there was some issues there with him. Matthew reports that Herod viewed Jesus' birth as a threat to his own power. So not only did he seek to destroy Jesus, but of course this is the Herod the Great that ordered the massacre of all male children at Bethlehem under the age of 2. It is a deed that is otherwise unattested in extra-biblical literature, but it matches his cruelty. According to Josephus, besides rebuilding the harbor at Caesarea, which was named in honor of the ruling Roman family, Caesar, Caesarea, right? The most notable achievement of Herod the Great was the building of the temple in Jerusalem, or kind of the beautification of the temple, a process that started in 2019 BC, got finished. I always find this so ironic. The temple was finished, Herod's temple version was finished in AD 63, only 7 years before it got destroyed. All right? Whenever, Titus and the 10th Roman Legion came down and just decimated it. So imagine that. You've been doing this project for what, 80 years? 7 years later, it's gone. Right? That's tough. Of course, Herod didn't live to see his temple decimated. The rabbi said that whoever's not seen the temple of Herod has never seen a beautiful building. Herod the Great married 10 women for various political reasons. Maybe loyalty, solidarity, all the stuff you can imagine. These women bore him many sons who all struggled to position themselves to inherit their father's dominion. But Rome would soon disappoint all of them because after Herod the Great's death, Rome reduced the power of the Herods, dividing Palestine among 3 of Herod the Great's sons. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a power struggle. So let me take you to this next slide here. I think it'll work. Up here, you got Herod's kingdom was what's in black here. So Herod ruled that area. He was the big dog, okay? Well, they broke it up. So Herod Archelaus got this big section here. Herod Antipas got Galilee and he got Perea down here, which they're not even like adjoining land masses. You see that? They're disconnected in a way. And then Philip, he got this area over here, okay? Antipas and Philip, they're mentioned in Luke chapter 3 and verse 1. So what do we say here? Archelaus was given the bigger territory, right, in about 4 BC when Herod the Great died. And he was promised that he would get to rule over the whole shebang if he proved to be a worthy guy. Long story short, he did not prove to be a worthy ruler. And he got exiled, okay? And so guess what they did? In 6 AD, Rome said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put a Roman governor over this area right here. Before 44 AD, he was known as the prefect. After 44 AD, he was known as the procurator. Tuck that away. So this area, which includes what? Jerusalem, moves from the hands of a Herodian guy into the hands of a Roman guy, a governor, prefect, procurator type, okay? Philip, he was basically, he didn't possess the ambition and the scheming character of Antipas and Archelaus. People generally liked him. You need to know about him. He married Herodias' daughter Salome. Now, who is she? She's the girl that danced for Herod Antipas. And then Herodias goes to her and says, Salome, I want you to ask for the head of John the Baptist. Okay? Salome married this Philip. Okay? And going to Herod Antipas, he's over Galilee and over Perea. One of the significant things about him, and I don't know, it does have it up here. That's awesome. Okay, Nazareth is right here. About 4 miles away is a city called Sepphoris. Okay? Sepphoris sat on a hill, so from Nazareth you could look in the distance and you could have seen the lights of the city sitting on a hill. Some people have wondered if that's the imagery that Jesus kind of had in mind when as the city sat on a hill, so you are a light of the world. But one of the things that's interesting is we know that Joseph and Jesus appeared to have been carpenters, stonemasons maybe. Herod had a massive building campaign in Sepphoris. And not a few scholars surmise, being 4 miles away, that might have been where Joseph and Jesus did a lot of work. That they would have gone there for work and they would have helped build that city or different parts of it and all of this kind of stuff. So that's a little. In one of my grad classes, we had a fellow preacher student do he did a report on Sepphoris, and I was like, that's awesome. I've never studied this place, but Herod Antipas is the one that founded that city. He also founded another city called Tiberias. Who do you think he was trying to honor with that, right? That would have been the Caesar in power, the Roman emperor at that time. But one of the unfortunate things for him is that in the process of building the city, an ancient cemetery was struck. And subsequently, Antipas had difficulty in populating it. Why? Because Jews regarded it as an unclean area. So Antipas offered free houses and lands, as well as exemption from taxes for the first few years for anyone that would move into his new city. Because that's embarrassing. Build a city for Tiberias, but nobody wants to live there. So he had to make something work here to get people into the city. In the Gospels, Herod Antipas is best known for his imprisonment and beheading of John the Baptist. Antipas had been married to the daughter of a Nabatean king, Orestes IV. More than likely, it was a marriage that was arranged by Augustus, possibly. But here's the problem. When Antipas traveled to Rome in AD 29, he visited his brother Herod Philip. This is not the same Philip that married Salome. This is a different Herod, okay? And while there, Antipas fell in love with his niece Herodias, who happened to be the wife of Herod Philip. Herodias agreed to marry Antipas when he returned from Rome, provided that he divorce his first wife. And so Herod Antipas went about to divorce his first wife. His first wife got wind of it. She went back to her daddy, and let's just say her daddy wasn't happy about it. He took it as a personal insult and would later retaliate against Herod Antipas. When Antipas married Herodias, John the Baptist, who was fearless, just kept picking at him. You're not supposed to be married to her. I mean, not only was he not supposed to be married to her based on sort of the divorce protocol, but he also wasn't supposed to be married to her based on the incest situation that's very much alive in Leviticus. Okay? So what happened to John the Baptist? Why did Herodias ask for his head? Because John the Baptist had become the conscience she didn't want to have. And I think the story of Herod and Herodias and John the Baptist has implications for marriages today. It's not a fun, warm, devotional thought, but John stuck to it here, right? And he died as a result of it. We might say that during his final journey toward Jerusalem, we know that Jesus crossed over Antipas's territory. And some of the Pharisees came to warn Jesus that he should leave because Antipas wanted to kill him. You might recall that Jesus told them, "Go tell that fox that he would continue his ministry of casting out demons and healing for a short time, and then when he was finished, he would go to Jerusalem and he would die." And Herod Antipas, of course, was the one to whom Pilate sent Jesus for a trial of sorts, right? And then finally we come to the Roman governor Caesarea. See, you remember that Archelaus initially had control of Judea and the larger part of his daddy's kingdom, Herod the Great's kingdom, but he was an idiot, okay, basically just an idiot. And he lost his kingdom, and it was given to Roman governors. Obviously, the most famous of these guys is going to be, well, let's see if I got, let's see here. Hold on. There we go. Is going to be Pontius Pilate, okay? He is, in fact, the fifth governor. So they started putting him there in 6 A.D. By the time you got to 26 A.D., you'd already had 4 Roman governors that had come and gone. And Pilate would be the governor from 26 A.D. all the way to 36 A.D., okay? The only inscription found containing the name Pontius Pilate is right here in front of you on the screen. It is kept in the the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. It has his name on there, and it gives us his correct title of prefect. Okay? And like I said, prior to 44 AD, you were known as a prefect. After 44 AD, you were known as a procurator. Okay? And then there's also, discussion about, did you have military power, did you have financial power, all of these kinds of things. But it is reported that he obtained his position via one of his mentors. He was given some wide political power. You might be interested in hearing what a contemporary of his said about him. This is the Jewish philosopher named Philo. He records Pilate's venality, his violence, his thefts, his assaults, his abusive behavior, his frequent executions of untried prisoners, and his endless savage ferocity. That was Philo's estimation of Pilate. The New Testament mentions a little-known incident of Pilate mixing the blood of the Galileans with their sacrifices in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. The interpretation of this incident seems to indicate that Pilate had killed some Galileans when they were offering sacrifices at Jerusalem. It appears that nothing else is known of this event, but it fits the assessment of Philo regarding Pilate's brutal character. Now, if we had time, there are actually 4 episodes from Pilate's governorship that are reported outside of the New Testament, which also substantiate Philo's assessment of Pilate's character. And if we had time, we could go through these. I will tell you, it's kind of a mixture of I want to bring some Roman standards into Jerusalem, set them up on the Temple Mount. People had tried that before. It didn't go well. It didn't go well for Pilate. Okay? Another thing that you need to know is that Pilate, by the time Jesus is on trial, Pilate had already been in trouble with the Roman emperor. He had already got his hands slapped. And there are some events prior to Jesus where the people are like, hey, if you don't want to stop what you're doing, we'll let Caesar know. That's important because this seems to be what tips the scales in the whole crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Right? That they began to put pressure on him by saying, if you don't do this, you are no friend of Caesar. And that's when he kind of sets his face toward doing what they want him to do. Okay? Kind of as a political expediency, really. But his character kind of backs that up. You know, it's kind of interesting, right, when you're reading the Pilate story. If you're a first-timer, just imagine you're a first-timer. You don't know how it's going to end. Like, you don't... it's hard to imagine you don't know how it's going to end. But if you didn't know how it was going to end, you might be like, I think Pilate might wise up here and do the right thing and let him go. He's innocent. It's clear. He said he's innocent. He knows he's innocent, right? And you might think that at some point Pilate's going to let him off. But when you kind of get to know a little bit more about his character, you know what was inevitable here. And frankly, as I've said many times before, it was the whole thing was a grave miscarriage of justice. But we needed that grave miscarriage of justice to happen. We needed Jesus to die on the cross. Plain and simple. Right? And we know there was no other way, because Jesus already tried that in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? If there is another way, please let this cup pass from me. There was no other way. We needed his crucifix. We needed his sacrifice. We needed what happened under Pontius Pilate in the year AD 30 to be saved from our sins. But the means of getting there, tough. Let me get back here a little bit. Got a little time left. Come back to this chart because one of Herod the Great's sons left a child who became known to history as Herod Agrippa the First. He was sent to Rome by Herod for an education. There he lived a very self-indulgent lifestyle, okay? But he also managed to make a really important friend while he was in Rome. First name Gaius, but last name or nickname was Caligula. Okay? We studied Caligula last week. He was one of the Roman emperors. So when Caligula came to the throne in AD 37 as the Roman emperor, he gave Agrippa the former tetrarchies that Philip had and another guy named Licinius, who is mentioned also in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. And he gave Herod Agrippa the title king. Okay? Herodias, Agrippa's sister and now wife of Herod Antipas, urged her husband to secure the title of king for himself. So she's pushing Antipas. You need to be the king, not Herod Agrippa. When Antipas went to Rome for this purpose, I don't guess he thought he's going to be running into a friend of Herod Agrippa in the Roman Emperor Caligula, right? And so this led to Agrippa. This led to Antipas's banishment in AD 39, and we might say to Herodias' credit, she went into banishment with him. She didn't leave him and go off and marry somebody else. She went with him. Anyway, Herod Agrippa is, of course, the one we read about in Acts chapter 12, who not only imprisoned Peter, but beheaded James, the son of Zebedee. That would be John the apostle's brother. Okay? But it is also that same chapter that narrates Agrippa's gruesome death in about AD 44, and it is an account that you also find in Josephus, not just Acts chapter 12. Herod Agrippa II, very quickly at 17, Agrippa's son was not judged ready to rule in his father's place, so there was another actual Herod that came in between them, but eventually he got this job, this kingdom in AD 53, and he is the Agrippa before whom Paul makes his defense in Acts chapter 26. It's not the same Agrippa, obviously, from Acts 12, okay? There are some later Roman governors that, two of which are, important for our New Testament study. That's going to be Felix, and that's going to be Festus. I will say the thing that's interesting about Felix is that he was a former slave who actually made his way all the way up to governor in Judea. He was a slave to the mother of Claudius, Emperor Claudius. And this is what kind of gave him an in at that point. Felix is also the one that said, hey, another time Paul might listen to you about some of this stuff, that you're preaching on, and we have no indication that he ever listened to it. Festus also heard a case of Paul's, and it's before Festus that he says, hey, I'm going to appeal to Rome. And I think Festus was happy, because he was like, I don't want to deal with this leftover problem that Felix had. Festus come in after Felix. About the year that Festus died, and before the new governor arrived, there was a high priest who took advantage of the opportunity, and he killed James, the brother of Jesus, and who was, of course, a leading Christian in Jerusalem. Some of the other names that come up we won't talk about. Theophilus, I put a question mark there because some think he might have been the benefactor who said, hey, Luke, I'll pay you to write and do your historical stuff. But he might have been a Roman official of some kind. Quirinius is mentioned in Luke 2. There's the Sergius Paulus, who was a governor of Cyprus. And then we've mentioned Gallio in the past. Because of an inscription of him, we're able to date most of our New Testament around the time of Paul. I'll close with this. 1 Peter 2, 13 and 14. Be subject, for the Lord's sake, to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. It's when you've studied about some of these emperors and some of these governors that you might be tempted to say, well, they don't deserve my respect. They don't deserve my honor. Scripture highlights that government exists for a reason. Its two big things is to hold in check those who aren't keeping the peace, right? And it's to honor those and help those who are, okay? But this passage reminds us that, and more than likely when Peter wrote this, he was probably thinking in terms of Nero, who was as messed up as any of them. But there was still the call to acknowledge their place, to acknowledge their role, even to pray for them, right? Because they are carrying on some important work in God's world, okay? So there's just something to chew on. All right, we'll come back and enter into another little different section of New Testament background next week. Thanks for y'all's attention.
Good evening. Welcome to the Pulaski Street Church of Christ. We're thankful that all of you are here with us tonight. We do have a few that we would like to make you aware of as far as prayer requests are concerned. Jamie Dixon passed out yesterday. She hit her head and suffered a severe concussion. She was kept overnight at Murray Regional Hospital for observation and testing, and today she was told that she has a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. So she was released late this afternoon to go home to rest and recover. Let's keep Jamie in our prayers. Larry Pope has been feeling extremely fatigued, and he is scheduled to have a heart catheterization on Tuesday, June the 4th. Charlie Shadrick, or Chuck, I got to call you by your name if you're watching from home. That's what I call him. He had his tonsils and adenoids removed and tubes put in his ears today in Franklin, and he is recovering at home. We're thankful that went well. Catherine Taylor, the daughter of Chris and Stephanie Taylor, granddaughter of Larry and Bonnie Pope, underwent an MRI yesterday at Vanderbilt, and she will be scheduled soon to have another MRI, this time with contrast, to rule out any pituitary issues. Please pray for all these and all those that you will see listed in the bulletin and those that have been mentioned recently and sent out in emails and updates. We do again extend our Christian love and sympathy to Christy and Mark Miller and family on the death of Christy's mother, Miss Hazel Violet. A private graveside service was held on Sunday, May 24th at Kids Cemetery, and a memorial service is scheduled for Sunday, June the 14th at 2 p.m. here in the auditorium at Pulaski Street. Got several reminders. Our interns are here. Shep and Bailey have arrived. Bailey got here earlier this afternoon. Her mom, Heather, is here with her tonight as well, and we're glad to have all of them here. You're going to even get to hear from Jacob tonight. He's going to give our devotional and invitation here in just a moment. But we are thankful that they are back with us again this summer. Lions, we will meet at Ken's Park at 7 p.m. tomorrow night for a Creekside Devo. If you need to ride the van, be in the parking lot by 6:50. This Sunday, May the 31st, will be a fifth Sunday, and there will be no meal and no PM service this coming Sunday afternoon. Lions next Monday, June the 1st, and Tuesday, June the 2nd, will be a couple of Make Me a Servant days. So Lions, you'll want to meet in my office at 9:30 a.m. for those days of service. And also keep your ears open for other random service days throughout the summer, as there may be different jobs that we can help out with. Lions, you will also want to meet in the south parking lot at 5:30 p.m. next Monday evening, June the 1st, to head to Etheridge Church of Christ for Bible Rama. That will be going on next week. It begins at 6 p.m. each evening, and so the teens and adults will all be together. Dustin Perkins will be the speaker there for that, and they'll have their classes and rotations for younger groups. Lions, another one. Meet in the south parking lot next Wednesday, June the 3rd at 5 p.m. for Good Works Wednesday. We'll make a visit and then eat supper before coming back for Bible class. If you are interested in participating in church league softball this year, you need to get in contact with Lance Pope or Peyton Sockwell as soon as possible, or you can just bypass them and find the sign-up sheet that is on the round table out in the foyer. You got to sign that and have some information on there so that they know you won't sue them. And so you can go ahead and get your name and all your information. It's got to be signed by our first game, and this will help that get taken care of prior to that. Last thing before Jacob Shepard comes up here, Vacation Bible School is going to be here really, really quick, June 7th through 11th. Monetary donations are still needed for purchasing children's Vacation Bible School snacks. You can give that money to Dawn Hammond or any of the elders. And we are also raising money for the Peanut Butter Drive for Haiti, and you can give that money to any deacon or office staff member. And again, that is monetary donations only, not jars of peanut butter.
Good evening. It is so great to be back with you guys. It just has been a wonderful week getting prepared, getting settled back in. I'm very thankful for Tommy and Patsy for being willing to house me this summer. It's been an absolute blessing just to be with them, and been great to be back with y'all. If you can't tell, we're going to keep your kids busy this summer. I promise you that. We've already been able to have so many great interactions with them, and we're so excited to keep them busy again this summer. You know, back when I was in high school, I was in love with football. I've always grown up watching football. I always, when I got to the chance to play football for the first time, I got on it. I was in there. I was always wanting to be a part of it. Football has just been a part of my life for a very long time. And when I got to high school, I wasn't that good. I'm not going to be honest. I was awful. I showed up to practices. I went in there and I gave my all in practices, but I would just go home, maybe find a video game or a YouTube video and just eat. I just did not lock in when it came time to actually be prepared to play football. I would go to all the practices. I'd be at all the meets, the meetings, the workouts, but I wouldn't do anything other than that. I would just show up. And I got to my sophomore year. It was the end of our sophomore season, and we had position meetings with our position coaches. And he called me in, my coach did. I had a really good relationship with him, and I came in there. I got a little bit of playing time that year, and he brought me in. He's like, Jacob, do you want to play next summer? Or do you even want to play at all next season? Do you want any starting time at all? And my obvious answer was, yeah, of course I do. I really want to show off for my parents. I want to be out there. I want to play. I want to give my all. And the coach was like, well, you're not going to start next year if you keep doing what you're doing. You're not going to get any playing time next year if you don't change something. See, I was just showing up. I did not care what I did outside of practice. I was just there. I was just showing up. I was just giving my all in that moment when I showed up on the practice days at the workouts, but I was not doing anything outside of that. This past year at CYC, they gave an illustration that really stuck with me. And they got up there, the SWAT team did, and they were doing this little skit, and they started talking about something called the 4 Ps. The plastic polished pulpit plant, that's what they called it, the plastic polished pulpit plant. It's here every Sunday, it's here every Wednesday, it's here at every gospel meeting, at every VBS, but it just sits there. It doesn't do anything. You know, in our lives, in our Christian lives, in our Christian walk, do we just show up on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights? Do we not actually give our heart to God? I think about Matthew chapter 15. Whenever Jesus is talking to the scribes and Pharisees about traditions, they're getting real mad and asking him, why are you letting your apostles break tradition? And Jesus responds with, why do you let tradition keep you from doing the commandments of God? And he gets down to verse 7. He says, you hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. See, in our lives, do we just show up? Do we honor God with our lips on Sundays and Wednesdays, but not truly honor him outside of worship? Do we come to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, but we don't do anything to build our faith outside of that? Do we not serve when we get the opportunity to? Do we not study and worship on our own? Do we just show up on Sundays and Wednesdays? It's not enough. Even Paul calls out the Athenians in Acts chapter 17, telling them that just being religious isn't enough. You've got to give your all to God. It's really important for us to understand that we've got to give our all to God, or we got to give our whole heart and not just show up. We got to give our all to God. Tonight, if you're ready to make a change, if you're ready to give your all to God, if you haven't been walking with him the way you should be, you have the opportunity to make that right tonight. Whatever your need may be, why don't you come while we stand and we sing?
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold, the man upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything. No gifts, no power, no wisdom. But I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer. But this I know with all my heart, his wounds have paid my ransom. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, we love you and we are grateful for the many ways that you have shown us your love. We pray that you would help us to be more committed to you and allow our will to become yours. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.